no matter what the outcome is today, we fight no matter what.
That's
Because
right.
either we're fighting over the fact that Biden won, and we know from history that white supremacy doesn't like to lose, and it will pull some of the most egregious, darkest stunts that our minds could even fathom, simply to grasp onto power and ultimate dominance. And or wins again, and then we end up, turning things upside down. And so I'm of the mindset that top-down government solutions aren't the answer to all of our problems. Although it's important to vote because it helps us prevent the GOP from consolidating power. We also know that it's an opportunity for us to pivot away from the political moment and into the movement. Because really, we know throughout history, this has always been the case. We have always saw the abuse of power take place in a way that further marginalizes us, right? And so I think that it's important to remind people that even though they show up to vote, their job isn't done once you cast that vote at the polls. We still have a responsibility to ourselves and to our loved ones to keep these elected officials accountable.
That's right. I appreciate you saying that. And I think it's very important for us to have these conversations because I think that voting is just it is just a part of the journey. Like I grew up in church, and in church, people would talk about tithing. And I was like, tithing, people would say, I don't tithe because I'm not buying a pastor's new car. And I was like, well, if you're a Christian, tithing isn't about that. Tithing is praise and worship, right? And if you tithe, that is just you doing your due diligence as a good Christian, which so many of these people claim to be. Voting is part of being a citizen. It is a right that you have. You pay the taxes, so you have a right to choose who is employed to manage funds in your community, that make decisions about your schools, your law enforcement and your habitat. And I don't think people realize there are a lot of things on the ballot other than the president of the United States, but it is just the beginning. I wanted to speak about this because I see a lot of people talking about voting, and I do want to talk about how these elections affect marginalized communities. And I wanted to make sure that we talked about our transgender brothers and sisters and how they have been affected by who's in office and why it is important for us to show up and vote for each other when we are in different marginalized groups. And there's intersectionality that we don't honor. But the reason why it is important for us to have a collective voice, being on the other side of everything that the GOP is trying to take down.
Well, I think this voting election is more personal for the trans community because this administration from day one has came out for us. I'm talking like going after our children in schools, telling, shelters and homeless programs that they can discriminate against us based on our gender identity, which is personal for me because as someone who was formerly homeless, that was how my entire journey kicked off. I was discriminated against on the job and was fired. I ended up losing my apartment. I became homeless. I got turned away from shelters, men's shelters and women's shelters. And so I had no choice but to engage in survival sex work, which then led to drug addiction because I had to numb myself to all of the heartbreaking things that I had to do in the name of survival. So this administration has made it very clear that, that we all don't have equal rights and that we all don't deserve the same dignity and respect. And so one of the things that I'm talking to the community about is being able to exercise your voice no matter what. We know that there were 1.3 million trans Americans who are eligible to vote. We also know that I believe it was 33% of those were non-binary or people who were afraid to go to the polls because they didn't, whether their name matched their ID or the sex on their ID, just all of those different things are factors that may deter them from voting. So I just want for those individuals who are trans or non-binary to know that you still have a right to cast your vote. It is not the job of a poll worker to determine what your gender is or to even, tell you what your name should or shouldn't be. You still have a right to cast your vote. And if you have a problem with casting your vote, there are resources. You can ask to speak to the person on site who is in charge. And if they don't get you anywhere, you can call the registrar, which is typically up in your state's capital, and then they can call whoever they need to call to make sure that you get to vote. I think the message that we want to drive home today is that you should not leave without casting your vote. There is not going to be a circumstance or situation where they tell you that you have to go, come back later, do something different. You have a right to cast your vote. And that is the message that I'm giving to everybody, whether you're trans, LGBTQ, whomever, you have a right to cast your vote if you are eligible. I do know that in certain states, they have found ways to discriminate against people who've, been convicted of a crime, but we're also voting for those people in solidarity.
I really appreciate you saying that, and I appreciate you being here because I know today you're probably going to be super busy. When we talk about this progressive agenda, and we talk about what is going on right now in America, aside from the transgender, reality and what we're fighting for, what are some of the most important things we should be thinking about with regards to why we should be voting in this election?
I think another piece is that we have to recognize that voting is an opportunity to exercise solidarity. So even if you are someone who doesn't feel that your livelihood is being threatened and you are someone that may have privilege above others, it's important to use your vote as a show of solidarity. I think that it was a conversation I had with Angelica Ross on her show last night when we were talking about why our liberation is linked. And so we know that historically, white supremacy has only been able to thrive when it implements a strategic plan of divide and conquer. So to convince some of us that because we got what we needed, I got my rights, I'm not illegal, I'm not, fill in the blank, we forget that it's all of us or none of us. And so the only way that we're ever going to see the policies and legislations that improve our lives pass into law is when we build cross-cultural collaborations that yield tangible outcomes that help us thrive. And so it has to be no person left behind. So even as someone who's never been incarcerated, it's still my responsibility to show up for my incarcerated brothers, sisters, and others. As someone who was born in the US, it's still my responsibility to speak up for undocumented people and immigrants. As someone who can't have children, I still need to be making sure that I think about reproductive rights, because the minute I let them dictate what somebody does or can't do with their body, they can come to me as a trans person and tell me what I can and can't do with my body. And we've seen them make that attempt by them telling doctors and medical providers that they don't have to see trans people or treat us because of their own personal spiritual beliefs and things like that. So it's important to understand that for those of us who are going to the polls and those of us who have cast our votes early, that we're not just voting for ourselves, but we're voting in solidarity for those who have the capacity to show up and fight with us on the front lines. This is an excellent opportunity to show your solidarity through your vote.
The last thing I'm going to ask you, and then I'm going to let you go because I know you got a lot of stuff going on. What do you say to those people who keep bringing up the crime bill or Kamala's prosecutorial history? What do you say to those people who say, why are we voting for them? They are the enemy to us as people of color, Black people in this country.
Because there is a way to hold people accountable and hold them at the same time. I am one of the people who, when I saw that Kamala was in the conversation, I was like, sis, there are some things here that we have to heal. And the thing is that we can't heal what we don't reveal. And I was one of those people that was like, I need you not to be dodging every single question that we ask you. But I also know that as a Black woman, as someone who has had to overcome insurmountable odds to be in the position that she's in, there is an opportunity to support that historical moment in a way that leaves the door open for Black leadership that's coming behind her. So I think that this is a conversation around nuance that we really haven't had the opportunity to think about, because even at the community grassroots level, we're constantly talking about restorative justice. What does restorative justice look like? And for those who don't know, restorative justice is that space that we create that allows those who have offended and harmed others to sit down with those who have been harmed by their actions and talk about the ways in which amends can be made and they can heal so that they can move forward. And it gives the opportunity for those who've been harmed or the victim or the survivor to then say what they need to make things right. And so essentially, we're talking about taking restorative justice from the grassroots level and in our communities and imagining what that looks like for Black leadership. Because what I'm not going to do is I'm not going to perform anti-Blackness for white consumption. I'm not going to perform anti-Blackness for, you know, those who don't like either of us. They don't care that you have a valid concern about Kamala or Joe Biden. What they care about is that we can't get ourselves together, and so we can't think strategically and think about how we're going to move forward. So I'm reminded of the quote by Rebecca Solnit that said that voting is a chess move, not a Valentine. So it's an opportunity for us to intentionally be strategic, not saying that we're in full agreement with what somebody's policies and ideas are, but understanding that we all evolve. And I think I speak for all of us when I say that we've all done and said something that has been harmful. And in hindsight 2020, we look at that and then we allow that to inform how we move forward. What the hope is that this ticket is listening. And if they aren't listening, then we know what we have to do. But there is nobody who is more unqualified and more unwilling or unwilling to listen to the people than Donald Trump. So again, it isn't one of those, well, they're all this way, let's throw them out. It's about being strategic and thinking about how we make moves that are going to prevent the consolidation of power.